Harwick, Manitoba had dropped to -29 the night. Claire Hendricks realized she had less than 16 hours to stop her brother-in-law from stealing everything her husband had ever built. She was 42 years old, 11 weeks a widow, standing alone in a farmhouse that was no longer, on paper, legally hers. Then her boot went through the kitchen floor, and the world underneath changed everything. It had started as most disasters do, with paperwork. Glenn Hendricks died on a Tuesday in early February, quietly and without warning, a blood clot that reached his brain sometime between midnight and the moment the alarm went off at 5:45 a.m. Claire found him on his side of the bed, still warm, his expression almost peaceful, which was the cruelest part, she would later tell people, because Glenn had never once looked that relaxed while he was alive. He was a warrior, a planner, a man who kept backup copies of backup copies, who laminated important documents and stored them in a fireproof box in the basement workshop. Or so she had believed. After the funeral, after the neighbors stopped bringing casseroles and the sympathy cards went quiet, Bernard Ashford arrived at the farmhouse with a briefcase. Bernard was Glenn's older brother by 6 years, 51, trim in the way men who are vain about aging are trim, graying at the temples, with the kind of permanent faint smile that never quite reached his eyes. He worked in commercial real estate in Winnipeg and had always made Claire feel, in some intangible but consistent way, like a problem he was patiently waiting for someone else to solve. He set his briefcase on the kitchen table, Glenn's table, built from reclaimed barnwood the summer they moved in, and told Claire he was there to help. Glenn made some decisions about the estate before he passed. Bernard said, sliding a folder across the wood. "I know this is a difficult time. I want to make the transition as simple as possible for you." Claire stared at the folder. What transition? Glenn left the property to the family trust. Bernard folded his hands. The house, the outbuildings, the acreage, all of it transfers to the Ashford Family Holdings Trust. I'm the executor. Glenn and I discussed this at length. He was worried about you managing it alone. He wanted you protected. Claire set down her coffee mug very carefully, because her hand had started to shake and she didn't want him to see it. Glenn never mentioned a family trust to me. He didn't want to worry you. Bernard's smile didn't move. You know how Glenn was. He handled things quietly. He did. That was what made it almost believable. Glenn had handled the farm accounts, the property taxes, the annual reviews with their accountant, while Claire ran the market garden on the East Quarter and kept the books for her catering business. They'd split their life that way for 19 years, practically and without drama. But Glenn had also loved this land. He'd grown up on it, watched his father work it, rebuilt the drainage system himself over 3 summers. He would not have signed it away without telling her. He simply would not have. "I need to see the original documents," Claire said. "Of course. My lawyer will send everything over." Bernard's voice stayed warm. "In the meantime, I'll need you to vacate the residential portion by the end of the month. The trust has to begin a value assessment ahead of a sale." A sale. A land development group out of Calgary has had their eye on this corridor for 2 years. 47 acres, road access, proximity to the new highway interchange. Worth considerably more than Glenn may have realized when he set up the trust. Bernard clicked the briefcase shut. "I'm sure we can find you something comfortable in town. A condo, maybe. Glenn would have wanted you settled." He said Glenn's name the way people say the name of someone who can no longer contradict them. After Bernard left, Claire sat at the kitchen table for a long time without moving. Outside, the February wind dragged through the spruce trees along the north fence line like something being pulled across gravel. The old timbers of the farmhouse contracted around her in the cold. The familiar creak of the 3rd step on the back stairs, the rattle of the mudroom window. Glenn had been meaning to reglaze since October. 11 weeks. Glenn had been gone 11 weeks, and his brother was already at the table with a briefcase. She called the only lawyer she knew personally, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who'd helped her with a contract dispute for the catering business 3 years back. Patricia was direct, occasionally blunt in a way Claire had found uncomfortable at the time and found deeply reassuring now. "Send me everything Bernard gave you," Patricia said, "and don't sign a single piece of paper. Don't initial anything. Don't acknowledge anything in writing." He said Glenn arranged this before he died, a family trust. Maybe he did. But Glenn was your spouse. In Manitoba, spousal property rights don't just disappear because someone names a trust. Either Glenn consented to transfer your shared homestead rights, which would require your signature too, or something about this document isn't what Bernard says it is. A pause. Can you get into Glenn's files, his originals? He kept everything in a fireproof box in the workshop. Find that box. Claire found it that same evening, exactly where Glenn always kept it, the second shelf of the workshop cabinet behind the stacked paint cans. She opened it with the small key on his keyring. Inside, their marriage certificate, the deed from when Glenn's parents transferred the property to him, the vehicle papers, and their wills, both of them dated 4 years earlier, leaving everything to each other. There was no trust document, no amendment to the will, no codicil, no letter of instruction. Nothing that mentioned Bernard or Ashford Family Holdings or a Calgary developer. Claire sat on the cold concrete floor and read Glenn's will 3 times. Then she photographed every page, locked the box, put it back behind the paint cans, and called Patricia the next morning. "The documents Bernard has are either fabricated, or he got Glenn's signature under circumstances that won't hold up," Patricia said. "How much is the land worth?" He mentioned a Calgary developer, said it was worth considerably more than Glenn realized. "Get me a property assessment," quietly. Patricia's voice shifted into a register Claire recognized from their first meeting, calm, focused, and dangerous in the way of something that has decided it's no longer interested in being polite. "And Claire, stay in the house. Don't move out. Don't give him any reason to say you vacated voluntarily." So Claire stayed. February turned into March, grey and grudging. Legal letters began arriving on stationery from a Winnipeg firm she didn't recognize, each one politely restating that her continued occupancy contravened the trust arrangement and requesting her cooperation. Patricia answered everyone. The language on both sides grew steadily less polite. The property assessment, when it came back, made Claire sit down. 47 acres in the Harwick corridor, with the highway interchange coming in 2 kilometers east, was worth, at current commercial projections, somewhere between $3 and $4 million. Glenn had never had a commercial assessment done, because Glenn had never intended to sell. He'd spent the past 2 years planning to subdivide the East Quarter and deed it to Claire outright, so she could expand the market garden. They'd talked about it at this table the previous November, over dinner with a map spread between them. $3 to $4 million. And Bernard had shown up 11 weeks after the funeral with documents Claire had never seen, trying to move it all into his own name. Court proceedings began in April. Patricia filed a challenge to the trust documents' validity. Bernard's lawyers filed countermotions. A hearing date was set for the following February, nearly a year out. In the meantime, Claire could stay on the property, but a freeze was placed on any sale or transfer pending the outcome. Bernard did not take this quietly. He showed up at the farmhouse one evening in early May without calling first. Claire answered the door and didn't invite him in. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. The thin smile was still there, but something behind it had shifted, like a door painted over so many times the frame no longer quite fits. "Patricia Okafor doesn't have anything. Glenn signed those documents willingly. There are witnesses." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Claire said. "The Calgary group has given us a deadline. November, or they move to a different site." His voice dropped half a register. "Claire, I have lawyers who do nothing but this, all day, every day. You have a caterer's income and a lawyer you hired for a contract dispute. You cannot win this." "Go home, Bernard." He left, Claire stood with her back against the closed door for a long time afterward, her heart hammering, not from anger, but from the uncomfortable possibility that he was right. Patricia was good, principled, thorough. She'd already found 3 procedural inconsistencies in the trust documents registration. But Bernard had resources Claire didn't have, and time in legal proceedings is almost always on the side of whoever has more money. She needed something stronger than inconsistencies. It came in the second week of June, when the kitchen floor gave way. Claire had been using the northeast corner of the old farmhouse kitchen for storage, the original structure, built by Glenn's grandfather in 1952, added onto twice since, but never torn down. The floorboards there had been soft for years. Glenn had always meant to reinforce them from the crawl space, and never got to it. She was crossing the kitchen with a box of canning jars when her boot punched through a board with a crack that sent her lurching into the counter. She stood there a moment, half lawing at herself, 1 foot through the floor. Then she looked down into the hole. There was something under there, not just crawl space dirt and insulation, but the edge of something flat and pale, wrapped in what looked like oilcloth. She got a flashlight, knelt, and shone the beam down. Resting on the bare earth beneath the kitchen was a flat bundle wrapped in yellowed oilcloth and tied with a leather lace. She pried up 2 more boards, lowered herself into the crawl space. Cold soil, old wood, a dry, dusty smell that reminded her of the farmhouse library where Glenn's father had kept his books, and lifted the bundle out. On the kitchen table under the overhead light, she untied the leather lace with hands that weren't entirely steady. The oilcloth had done its job. Inside, dry and intact, was a slim stack of papers under a rusted binder clip, and beneath them a smaller envelope sealed with wax. The top pages were handwritten in a cramped, precise script she didn't recognize. She read the first page twice before the meaning fully assembled itself. The handwriting belonged to Clifford Ashford, Glenn's father, who had died in 2003. Clifford had transferred the property to Glenn in 2001, 2 years before his death, a clean, documented, registered transfer. Claire had been at the table when the papers were signed. She and Glenn had already been married 6 years by then. What she hadn't known, what apparently no one had known, was that Clifford had also written this. 12 handwritten pages, dated October 1999, witnessed by 2 signatures she didn't recognize, laying out an arrangement Clifford had made with his elder son in 1997. Bernard had borrowed money from their father. A great deal of money. Claire's eyes stopped on the figure and had to restart. $240,000, drawn from the family account that funded the farm's operating capital. Structured as a private loan, no bank involved, because Bernard had told Clifford he needed it for a business venture he didn't want appearing on his credit history. Clifford had given it to him because Bernard was his son, and Clifford believed family took care of family. Bernard never repaid it. By 1999, Clifford was asking questions. Bernard's explanations kept changing. Clifford hired a private accountant, not the family's usual one, a woman from a firm in Brandon, and she found something. The $240,000 hadn't gone to any business venture. It had gone to personal debts from a string of failed investments and, more significantly, to what the accountant's notes called undisclosed personal financial obligations. A phrase Clifford had underlined twice, and beside it written a single word: gambling. Bernard had taken $250,000 from his father's farm account to cover gambling debts, and told him it was a business opportunity. Clifford had written it all down, had it witnessed, sealed the smaller envelope. Claire opened it now. Inside was a single folded sheet, a promissory note signed by Bernard, acknowledging the loan and promising repayment with interest by January 2002. Behind it, a handwritten addendum from Clifford, dated March 2000. Bernard came to me again last week. He wants me to forgive the debt in exchange for my signing over the mineral rights to the North Quarter. I refused. He was not pleasant about it. I am recording this here because I am not certain what my elder son is capable of when he believes something is owed to him. I am transferring the property to Glenn. Glenn is honest. Glenn will take care of this land and the family that comes after him. I want it understood, in whatever record this finds, that the Ashford family farm and all its land belongs to Glenn Robert Hendricks and his heirs, free and clear, without condition or claim from Bernard. I know what Bernard did. I know what he is. And I know he will try again when I am gone. Claire set the paper down. Outside, the June evening had gone quiet, the spruce trees dark against a sky that wouldn't fully darken for another hour this far north. Somewhere across the field, a meadowlark was going about its business. She picked up her phone and called Patricia. "I need you to come to the farm. I found something under my kitchen floor." Patricia arrived the next morning with a forensic document specialist named James Ito, who she'd apparently called at 7 a.m., and who looked like a man long accustomed to 7 a.m. calls. He spent 2 hours examining Clifford's papers, the paper stock, the ink, the witness signatures, the wax seal, with the unhurried patience of someone who understood that speed and accuracy don't mix. "The paper's consistent with late 1990s production," he said finally. "Ink degradation is appropriate for the stated dates. The wax impression matches a seal style commercially available in that period and discontinued since 2006. He looked at Patricia. "Barring lab confirmation, which I'd recommend, this is authentic." Patricia read Clifford's account twice, carefully, then looked at Claire with an expression she hadn't worn before, the look of someone who's been doing difficult work under difficult conditions and has just been handed exactly the right tool. "How long until Bernard's filing deadline?" Claire asked. "The full hearing's in February. But the Calgary group's deadline, the one he mentioned?" Claire nodded. "November." Patricia checked her calendar. "It's June 14th. Bernard filed a motion last week to accelerate. He wants the court to let the sale proceed conditionally, pending the title dispute. That hearing is July 9th. 3.5 weeks, Claire said. 3.5 weeks. Patricia closed her notebook. "Claire, I need to ask 2 witnesses. Do you know if either is still alive? A living witness who can verify this is worth more than any forensic report." Claire didn't recognize either name. She said so. "Then we work with what we have." Patricia stood, "and what we have is very, very good." The hearing on July 9th was held in a Winnipeg courtroom that smelled of old carpet and recycled air. Claire sat at the plaintiff's table in the suit she'd bought for Glenn's funeral and hadn't worn since, appropriate and terrible in equal measure. Across the room, Bernard sat flanked by 2 lawyers in suits that cost considerably more than hers, looking exactly as he always looked, contained, confident, faintly impatient, like a man waiting for everyone else to catch up. Patricia had spent 3 weeks preparing. She'd secured lab confirmation of the document's dates. Through a nephew, she'd found that one of the 2 witnesses had told his family before he died in 2011 about witnessing Cliff Ashford's private record. No specifics, but enough to corroborate that the document existed. She'd pulled Bernard's credit history from the late 1990s, which, with the forensic accountant's help, matched Clifford's account of gambling debts and undisclosed obligations almost exactly. She'd found the Calgary developers filing with the city planning office, listing the projected acquisition date for the Harwick property and its development value, $4.2 million. And she'd found one more thing. 3 weeks before Glenn died, Bernard had met with the Calgary developers' representative in Winnipeg, not as executor of any trust. That document was dated 14 months earlier, itself suspicious, but as a private individual presenting himself as the prospective vendor of the Harwick property. Glenn had still been alive, and in perfectly good health. Bernard had already been negotiating the sale of his brother's farm, while his brother was still living in it. Patricia laid it all out methodically, without drama, building a wall one careful course at a time. Nothing flashy, nothing wasted, just the case getting undeniably solid in front of the room. Bernard's lawyers objected at several points. The objections were overruled. Bernard himself sat very still, and Claire watched from across the room as the moment came. Right when Patricia introduced Clifford's document, when his composure stopped looking like confidence and started looking like something that took considerably more effort to maintain than it had an hour earlier. The judge called a 30-minute recess. When court reconvened, Bernard's lead lawyer asked for a word with opposing counsel. Patricia agreed, and Claire watched them confer, too quietly to hear. Patricia's face the look of someone listening to an offer she's already decided to decline, but is willing to let the other side finish making. She came back and leaned close to Claire. They want to settle. Withdraw the trust claim entirely. Waive costs, if you agree not to pursue the matter of Clifford's funds. Claire looked across the room at Bernard, watching her. The thin smile was still there, but its character had changed completely. The smile of a man who's realized the room is smaller than he thought, and the door he came in through isn't where he left it. No, Claire said. That's what I told them, Patricia said, and turned back to the judge. What followed wasn't dramatic the way things are dramatic in movies. It was procedural, methodical. The judge didn't bang a gavel or deliver a speech. She reviewed the submissions, asked several pointed questions about the trust document's provenance and the timeline of Bernard's meetings with the Calgary developer, then set a date for a full evidentiary hearing on the question of fraud, and declined to grant Bernard's motion to accelerate the sale. The conditional acquisition was suspended pending outcome. The fraud hearing took place in October. The forensic accountant testified. James Ito testified. The witness's nephew testified about what his uncle had told him. Patricia laid out the timeline of Bernard's dealings with the Calgary developer. A handwriting analysis, entered to challenge the trust document, concluded that while the signature bore Glenn's name, it showed inconsistencies with his known handwriting that were, the analyst said carefully, difficult to account for through natural variation alone. Bernard did not testify. He was charged in November, fraud over $5,000, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty. His lawyers negotiated a plea that kept him out of a courtroom a second time, but not out of the consequences. The trust document was invalidated. Ashford Family Holdings was dissolved. Title to the Harwick property was confirmed, unambiguously, in Claire Hendricks's name. The matter of Clifford's $240,000, with more than 2 decades of interest, was pursued as a separate civil claim and settled for an amount Patricia called satisfactory, and declined to specify, citing confidentiality, though she said it with the look of someone who was, in fact, satisfied. The Calgary developer moved on to a different site. Claire did not find this devastating. She spent December in the farmhouse, in the short, clear-lit, quiet kind of Manitoba December, where the cold is a presence rather than an inconvenience. She patched the kitchen floor herself, using boards salvaged from the old granary on the North Quarter. She and Glenn had refinished these floors together in their 3rd year in the house, and she still remembered how. She thought about Clifford, who had written everything down and hidden it beneath his kitchen floor, trusting the house to keep it until someone needed it. She thought about Glenn, who never knew the document existed, but who, in his own methodical way, had kept his own papers in a fireproof box because he believed important things deserved to be findable. And she thought about Bernard, who had walked through this house for 2 years after his father's death, sat at this table, stood in this kitchen, and never once knew what was under his feet. In January, she met with a local architecture firm that had done residential and agricultural work in the Harwick area for 30 years. They sat at the kitchen table, Glenn's table, reclaimed barnwood, still solid, and talked for 2 hours about what she wanted to do with the East Quarter. Not a condo development, not a highway corridor sale. A housing cooperative for agricultural families, 12 units on 8 acres, built around the existing market garden, with a shared equipment shed, a community root cellar, and a small building on the north end to run as a farm-to-table teaching kitchen. She was going to call it the Glen Hendricks Cooperative. She'd already spoken with the local agricultural college about a partnership. 2 years to build, she figured. That was fine. She had the land, she had the time, and she had a kitchen with new floorboards that would outlast her if she'd done it right. And if you ever find yourself wondering whether it's worth fighting when someone with more resources and more lawyers tells you that you cannot win, if you're ever handed paperwork that doesn't look right and told the sensible thing is simply to accept it, think of Clifford Ashford, who knew his son knew exactly what he was and wrote it down anyway, who trusted that the house would keep the truth until someone needed it badly enough to find it. The truth has a way of staying where it's put.